Passion. It's love's dark shadow. If attraction is the hazy gauze that clouds our vision and keeps us from seeing the object of our affection completely clearly or objectively, passion shifts the blinders to the sides and narrows our focus and our attention and our devotion exclusively onto that object. Passion causes us to identify ourselves, our being with that object, be it a person or a vocation, a hobby, a sports team. Passion sparks us into action to win that person's love or to follow that vocation, pursue that hobby, or to paint our faces the colors of the team that we support. Passion can morph into obsession. And when our passion is not reciprocated in the way that we want it to be or the way that we've come to expect it to be, it can lead to some of love's darker emotions, including possessiveness, jealousy, despair, anger, rage, vindictiveness, and even hatred. Wuthering Heights, the Oxford Dictionary of National Biography, wrote of this novel. Wuthering Heights is an extraordinary novel written with a power and passion which baffled and disgusted contemporary critics who labeled it coarse and loathsome. In this video, we're going to examine 3 key ways in which mild-mannered Emily Bronte managed to infuse Wuthering Heights with so much passion that it just about broke this book. Heyo, Stunt Reader here. The aim of this channel is to help you level up your craft as a novelist by learning to actively read novels in your genre and out, both classic and contemporary, to figure out what it is about these stories that makes them so emotionally compelling to so many people. If this is of interest to you, please subscribe and ding that notification bell so you'll be sure to know when I upload another video. Active reading is one of the easiest and most reliable ways to take your writing skills to the next level. So let's get reading. Last week we looked at The Power of Attraction in Jane Eyre, a novel written by Emily's sister Charlotte and published in the same year as Wuthering Heights. And Wuthering Heights is the perfect counterpoint to that novel. It is as different as a moonbeam from lightning, which is actually how Cathy in Wuthering Heights describes the difference between Edgar and Heathcliff, who are the 2 young men competing for her affection. Jane Eyre is the moonbeam. It is steady, it's constant, it's elegant. It is a simple first-person past narrative that is consistent throughout. It's chronologically organized. It is easy to follow and illuminating. Wuthering Heights, then, is the lightning bolt. It is swift and jagged and all over the place and difficult to follow at times. It is this a blinding light that stretches from heaven to hell in a heartbeat and then leaves you completely in the dark with just this after image on your retinas, trying to figure out what the hell just happened. One of the first things that struck me about Wuthering Heights is how claustrophobic this world is. You have really 2 locations. You have 2 families. You have the savage Earnshaws who live at Wuthering Heights, and then you have the more upper crusty Lintons that live at Thrushcross Grange. And there's 4 miles that separates them. But those are really your 2 main locations, and then sometimes the characters will move in between them. But that's it, and it's a very limited world. She's effectively putting the blinders on us, forcing our attention onto these characters, and in the same way that these characters, their attention is forced on each other. Point number 2, passion sparks us into action, causes us to take action, and that action leads to a reaction, and that reaction leads to a chain reaction that spirals or spins out of the initial character's control, out of all of the character's control. Passion does not come through in pining, it's not speeches or long soliloquies, it's not crying, it's not moaning and whining, it's action to make something happen. Passion grabs you and makes you do things, and not always the right things, not always things that are going to get you what you want or the outcome that you're hoping for. In fact, it's often quite the opposite, because these actions are not thought out, they're not premeditated. And so the damage that comes from that violent action, reaction, chain reaction is often self-inflicted. This is not a sniper's bullet from long distance with a scope and a laser sight. This is tossing a hand grenade into the room and stepping in after it. So let's take a look at one of these, just an amazing sequence in Wuthering Heights, probably my favorite part of the book, where we see this passion through action, a very, very concrete example of it. And this is at the end of what I would call the beginning hook, or Act 1. This is chapters 8 and 9. Okay, I'm going to try to run through this quickly. This is set at Wuthering Heights. Hindley is 23. He is the owner now. The father has died, so Hindley is the owner. He's a raving alcoholic, so not much of a role model, not much of an adult. He's the adult in the room, but not really. Nellie is the longtime servant and the narrator, and she's 22. Edgar Linton is Cathy's suitor. He is 18. Heathcliff is not Cathy's natural brother, but kind of her adopted brother in a sense. Grew up with her. He is 16. Cathy herself is 15 and described as the beauty of the neighbor of the area. And Hereton is Hindley's son. He's 2, just a little toddler. It's a rainy day. Edgar has come to visit Cathy on her invite. Heathcliff was hoping to hang with Cathy, but she's already otherwise occupied, so he storms out just as Edgar comes in. Cathy wants some time alone with Edgar, but Nellie's there, and Hindley has told Nellie to stay there as the chaperone. So Cathy says to Nellie, leave. Nellie says no. Cathy pinches her, and when Nellie complains, she calls Nellie a liar. Nellie shows the bruise, and Cathy smacks her across the face. And Edgar says, what are you, Catherine, my love, what are you doing? And little Hereton now starts to cry at this violence. And he says something about wicked Aunt Cathy, and Cathy grabs him by the shoulders, which drew her fury onto his unlucky head. She seized his shoulders and shook him till the poor child waxed livid. Edgar grabs Cathy's hand to keep her from shaking Hereton, and she hauls off and smacks him on the ear. And he's like, I'm getting out of here, and I'm never coming back. I'm afraid and ashamed of you. Cathy won't let him leave, though. She starts crying, and then Hindley comes home, and there's this... Nellie scurries about. She wants to take the shot out of the shotgun, because when he's drunk and he starts playing with the shotguns, who knows what could happen. And she also wants to hide Hereton in the kitchen cupboard, because Hereton is just terrified of his drunk father, whether he's in a good mood or a bad mood. But Hindley catches Nellie going to hide Hereton in the cupboard and gets furious, realizing that this is why Hereton never comes running out to greet him when he comes home from the pub. And he says, no law in England can hinder a man from keeping his house decent, and mine's abominable. Open your mouth. He held the knife in his hand and pushed its point between my teeth. And she says, for my part, I was never much afraid of his vagaries. I spat out and affirmed it tasted detestably. I would not take it on any account. They continue to bicker. Then Hindley wants to cut Hereton's hair. Hereton is squalling and kicking in his father's arms with all his might, and redoubled his yells when Hindley carried him upstairs and lifted him over the banister. I guess to try to silence him. That's what you do, is you dangle your child over the banister. I cried out that he would frighten the child into fits and ran to rescue him. And then as this is happening, there's a distraction as somebody enters from below. Hereton gives a final kick and frees himself from Hindley's grasp, and Hindley drops him. Heathcliff arrived underneath. just at the critical moment. And Hindley then says to Nellie, "It's your fault. You should have kept him out of sight," which is what she was trying to do in the first place, which is pretty hilarious. So then, after all of this, and that Nellie is sitting by the fire, lulling Hereton to sleep, she thinks that Heathcliff is going out to the barn, but he's actually just stretched out on a bench in the shadows behind the couch. So Nellie's not aware of him. Cathy comes in. She's not aware of him. Edgar's gone home at this point. Edgar fled when Hindley came home. So Cathy comes in to talk to Nellie and tell her, "Edgar proposed to me," and I said yes. And Heathcliff is hearing this. Nellie asks her, "Why do you love him?" She says, "Yes, I love him because he's handsome and he's rich and he's young." Heathcliff is listening to all this. Nellie asks her about Heathcliff, and Cathy says, "It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now." It's really wuthering out there. It's really appropriate. I hope you can hear some of the rain driving on my window here. Heathcliff gets up quietly and leaves. Nellie sees him, but Cathy does not. Not long after this comes Cathy's famous line where she says, "Nellie, I am Heathcliff." And this is her, again, talking about the identification, passion making you identify with the object of your affection, the object of your love. She identifies with Heathcliff so much that she feels like she is him, not just a part of him, but is him. And Heathcliff says similar things at other points in the novel. But again, we're not looking for what characters say at this point. We're looking for their actions. Heathcliff departs. He's just out of there, and he doesn't return for 3 years. Again, a very bold action. A storm comes, the rain turns into a storm and splits a tree that in turn knocks the chimney down, and sending a clatter of stones and soot into the kitchen fire. So even the environment is, kind of exploding around them. And Cathy, sensing that something is wrong, she goes running out into the storm, searching for Heathcliff. Does not find him, of course, because he's long gone, and she gets deathly ill as a result. The very end of chapter 9 and the very beginning of chapter 10 takes us into the next phase. Cathy does get better after she's well enough to convalesce. She goes to the Lintons at Thrushcross Grange and promptly gets Edgar's parents both ill, and they die. So 3 years after the parents die, Cathy and Edgar get married, and that is described in one sentence, which I think shows just how not important it is to Cathy, how unpassionate it is for her and for Edgar. The one sentence is, "Edgar Linton, as multitudes have been before and will be after him, was infatuated, and believed himself the happiest man alive on the day he led her to Gimmerton Chapel, 3 years subsequent to his father's death." That's all you get for the marriage. No ceremony, no party after, nothing. It's kind of tacked on to the end of that chapter 9. Chapter 10 opens saying that Cathy has become less volatile, and compares her to gunpowder. And said, the quote is, "The gunpowder lay as harmless as sand because no fire came near to explode it. I believe I may assert that they were really in possession of deep and growing happiness." So again, happiness is a very good thing, but it's not passion. The very next line, "It ended," which is just, Emily is at times just a savage. I love it. And it ends because Heathcliff returns 3 years down the road. He's a wealthy man now with revenge on his mind. Gunpowder, meet flame. Point 3, and this one might be a little uncomfortable or controversial. I would love to hear what you think in the comments. One thing I definitely picked up on in Wuthering Heights is a hint of the taboo, a hint of the transgressive or the prohibited. And I'm referring to my mind, a strong possibility that Heathcliff is actually Cathy's half-brother. Cathy and Hindley's father, Earnshaw, brings Heathcliff back as a young boy after going on a business trip to Liverpool. Supposedly, this is what he tells his children. Finds this homeless, becomes sympathetic toward this homeless child that he just happens to meet in the streets of Liverpool. There's a real possibility that, in fact, he did not go to Liverpool, but went somewhere where he knew, received a letter or some sort of communication and went and got his child from a mother other than Hindley and Cathy's mother, which would make Heathcliff Cathy's half-brother. It's a possibility, and I don't think that should be the grenade that gets tossed into the room, but it's more part of the atmosphere, part of the environment, part of the family, maybe the family history, that establishes that this person or this family or this environment is ripe for something transformative to happen, something beyond the pale to happen, something that pushes the boundaries of what is acceptable in typical human behavior. And that is the power of passion. Passion can push people, deform a person's character to the point where they do something beyond the pale. It could be murder, adultery, rape, sexual abuse. It's kind of a common one these days. A parent disowning a child. Something where it's understood that at some point this person or this person's family or this person's environment has already pushed a person, to commit a taboo. And I think that then primes the reader to understand that this person that they're reading about could also be pushed by passion to do something similar. The bonus point, or maybe a more advanced tip, but is one that I'm hesitant to recommend because it might wind up actually being more distracting. The narration of Wuthering Heights is so disjointed. You have 5 different narrators, even though they all kind of sound the same. The chronology is disjointed. The plot is there are lots of jumps in time. Even the characters' names are confusing. There's Cathy, but then her daughter gets named Catherine, so then there are 2 Catherines. In the book, there are lots of H names, which you saw in the passage we were looking at. You've got Heathcliff, Hindley, and Hereton, easily confused as well, first time through. So there's a lot going on that tends to make this kind of a tough read the first time through, especially. Thank goodness that this edition had a genealogy that made it a lot easier to keep track of both the chronology and the characters. So no one would ever look at this novel as an example of like a flawlessly structured novel, stylistic masterpiece, not by any stretch. But part of what makes it succeed is the passion that comes through regardless. And you could almost make a case that passion kind of disrupts the narrative and almost kind of breaks the telling of the story. We were looking at, in my writers group, we were looking at a submission from a person whose story started with an earthquake and had submitted several different sections and was not sure about the ordering of them. And it occurred to me
that it almost would reflect the earthquake to have these sections be kind of jumbled up chronologically,
because then that reflects the chaos that the earthquake would cause. And this could be similar, where the narrative reflects the upheaval, the emotional upheaval going on in these characters. Now, that I'm hesitant to recommend that, because if the reader notices that this is what's happening, then they notice the technique, and that pulls them out of the story. And I think that's probably not what you want. And it also could just come off as being a jumbled narration. You could do it on a smaller scale. It could be something where if you typically are using fairly short paragraphs or short chapters, you might expand them and go with some really long paragraphs or long chapters to sort of convey that, or vice versa. If you typically write more long paragraphs and long chapters, compressing it and chopping it up a little bit. You could change the chronology around a little bit or fracture it in other ways. It could even just be down to punctuation. One thing I noticed in Wuthering Heights is that in that passage that we read, and in a lot of it, Emily Bronte uses a lot of colons, which just kind of keep the sentence moving, keep it moving, keep it moving. It could just be, you know, working in maybe some dashes or colons or something like that, that in the passage where you're trying to really convey that sense of passion, that sense of action. So I hope you've gotten some value from these musings on passion and Wuthering Heights. If so, please subscribe, ding that notification bell so you'll be sure to know when I upload my next video. I thought that talking about just one book might make for a shorter video. We'll see in the editing, but I hope to see you in the next video. Till then, keep reading and keep writing.